The red and blue strobe lights were doing a synchronized dance across my living room ceiling, bouncing off the beige walls and making my IKEA coffee table look like a crime scene photo from a budget documentary. It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was in the middle of a very important, very loud snore when the pounding started. It wasn't a polite, "Hey neighbor, you left your lights on" tap. It was the "open up or we kick it down" thud of a fist that had been trained at an academy. I stumbled out of bed, wearing nothing but boxer briefs and a t-shirt that said FBI, Female Body Inspector, a gag gift from my brother that I suddenly regretted wearing as I realized actual law enforcement was on my porch. I grabbed a pair of sweatpants from the floor, hopped on one leg trying to put them on while navigating the hallway, and nearly tripped over my golden retriever Buster, who was wagging his tail like we were about to have a party. "Coming!" I yelled, my voice cracking with sleep. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. Standing there was a police officer who looked like he had been awake since the Carter administration. His name tag read Davis. He had the posture of a man who spent his days dealing with real problems, and his nights dealing with people like my neighbor. Beside him, looking smug in a floral bathrobe that assaulted the eyes almost as much as the flashing lights, was Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins was 70 years old, 4 feet 11 inches of concentrated suburban malice, and she was currently pointing a finger at me that trembled with rage. "That's him, officer!" she shrieked. Her voice sounded like a cat being put through a paper shredder. "That's the man who is trying to blind me. He's assaulting me with high-grade military lasers." Officer Davis sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh that involved his entire upper body. He looked at me, taking in my disheveled hair, my uneven sweatpants, and my general look of confusion. "Sir," Davis said, his voice flat, "we received a noise complaint and a report of visual assault." "Visual assault?" I rubbed my eyes. "Is that because of the sweatpants? Because I can change." Davis didn't smile. Mrs. Higgins, however, puffed up like a toxic pufferfish. "Don't get smart with the law, you delinquent," she spat. "It's that infernal machine on his garage. It's piercing my soul. It's staring into my bedroom like the eye of Sauron." I blinked, processing this. "The security light?" "The death ray," she corrected. "Officer," I said, turning to Davis and trying to adopt a tone of rational sanity. "My car was broken into last week. They smashed the passenger window and stole a gym bag full of dirty laundry and a tire gauge. So I went to Home Depot. I bought a standard $29 motion-activated LED light. It's mounted above my garage door. It's pointed at my driveway." "It is pointed at my soul!" Higgins screamed. She stepped off the porch and pointed dramatically toward my garage. "Look, just look at the violence of it." Officer Davis rubbed his temples. "Sir, can you turn it on?" "I don't have to," I said. "It's motion activated. If we walk over there, it turns on." "Let's walk," Davis said. We formed the saddest parade in American history. Officer Davis in the lead, hand resting on his belt, me shuffling behind in my slippers, and Mrs. Higgins bringing up the rear, muttering about lawsuits and the Geneva Convention. We walked down my driveway. As we passed the bumper of my Honda Civic, the sensor triggered. Click. Bzzz-t. The light flicked on. It was a bright white LED, sure. It was crisp. It illuminated the concrete, the grass immediately next to the driveway, and maybe the bumper of my car. It was a security light. It did exactly what the box said it would do. "Aha!" Higgins screamed, shielding her eyes as if she were a vampire exposed to high noon. "My retinas! It burns! Officer, arrest him! This is battery!" Officer Davis stood there, bathed in the cool, white glow. He looked at the light. He looked at my driveway. Then he turned and looked at Mrs. Higgins' house. Her house was across the street, and one lot over. She was on a slight incline, maybe 10 feet of elevation higher than me. Her bedroom window, the one she claimed was being assaulted, was about 60 yards away. Davis squinted at her house. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I can barely see the light reflecting off your siding. I seriously doubt this is reaching your bedroom window with any intensity." "It's psychological warfare," she insisted. "When I wake up to use the restroom at 2:00 a.m., I see a flash. It triggers my vertigo. It disturbs my cat. It's aggressive." I looked at Davis. "Officer, it's pointed at the ground. Look at the angle." Davis nodded. "The angle looks standard, ma'am. He has a right to secure his property, especially after a break-in." "So I have no rights?" she shrieked. "I am a widow. I am a taxpayer. I have lived in this neighborhood since before this hooligan was born, and I never had lasers shooting into my boudoir." "It's an LED, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "It's equivalent to maybe a 60-watt bulb." "Lies! It's a stadium light!" Officer Davis held up a hand. "Okay, folks, settle down. Sir?" He looked at me. "Is there anything you can do? Maybe angle it down a bit more, just to keep the peace?" I looked at Higgins. She was vibrating with triumph because the cop had asked me to do something. I looked at Davis. He just looked tired. I respected the tiredness. I didn't want to be the guy making his night longer. "Sure," I said. "I can angle it down a few degrees. I can even put a little hood on the top of it so the light cuts off sharply." "See that you do," Higgins snapped. "And I want it done tonight." "I am not getting on a ladder at midnight, Mrs. Higgins," I said firmly. "I'll do it tomorrow." "Unacceptable. I won't sleep." "Close. Your blinds," Davis suggested, his patience finally fraying. "My blinds are eggshell white. They are translucent to maintain the aesthetic of the room," she yelled. "That sounds like a personal problem," I muttered. "What did you say?" "I said I'll fix it tomorrow," I said louder. Officer Davis stepped between us. "He'll fix it tomorrow, Mrs. Higgins. Go inside. Sir, go to bed. If I have to come back out here tonight, I'm writing everyone tickets for disorderly conduct. I don't care who started it." He waited until Mrs. Higgins huffed and puffed her way back across the street, her bathrobe flapping like the wings of a deranged flamingo. Once her door slammed, Davis gave me a nod. "Nice slippers," he said. "Thanks. Good luck out there." I went back inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I laid there staring at the ceiling, wondering how a $29 purchase had turned into a neighborhood crisis. I was a structural engineer. I dealt with facts, loads, vectors, and permits. I didn't deal with crazy. But crazy, as I was about to find out, was very interested in dealing with me. The next day was Saturday, which meant I had time to be a good neighbor. I woke up early, fueled by coffee and a naive sense of optimism. I convinced myself that Mrs. Higgins was just a lonely old lady who was scared. Maybe she really was sensitive to light. Maybe her retinas were made of tissue paper. I went to the hardware store. I bought a sheet of aluminum flashing. I bought tin snips. I bought black matte spray paint. I spent 3 hours in my garage fabricating a custom hood for my security light. It was a masterpiece of engineering. I calculated the cutoff angle. I shaped the aluminum so that the light would hit my driveway and terminate exactly at the curb. Not a single photon would be allowed to escape into the airspace of the Higgins residence. I painted it black so it wouldn't look ugly. I got on my ladder. I installed it. I adjusted the sensor sensitivity so it wouldn't trigger unless someone was literally touching my car handle. Then, because I am, or was, a pathetically nice guy, I went inside and baked cookies. Chocolate chip, from scratch. I put them on a paper plate, covered them with foil, and walked across the street. I rang her doorbell. I waited. I could hear movement inside. I knew she was looking through the peephole. The door opened 3 inches. The chain was still on. One suspicious eye glared out at me. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, putting on my best smile, "I just wanted to let you know I modified the light. I put a blinder on it. It physically cannot shine on your house anymore. And, I brought these. Peace offering." I held up the cookies. She stared at the cookies. Then she stared at me. "Are they gluten-free?" she asked. No, standard flour." "I have a sensitive gut," she said, "and I don't accept food from potential criminals. You could have poisoned them." I didn't. "Poison the cookies, Mrs. Higgins. I ate the dough. I'm fine." "That's exactly what a poisoner would say." She slammed the door. I stood there for a full minute, holding a plate of warm cookies. I heard the deadbolt click. Then I heard a second lock click. I walked back to my house, dumped the cookies into my own trash can — I was too annoyed to eat them — and went inside. I told myself it was over. I had complied. I had gone above and beyond. The light was fixed. The war was averted. I was an idiot. Sunday night was quiet. The light worked perfectly. It triggered when I took the trash out, illuminated the ground, and stayed strictly on my property. I looked over at Mrs. Higgins' house. It was dark, peaceful. Monday came and went. Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after the break-in that started this whole mess, I was sitting in my living room watching a documentary on bridge failures when the room suddenly got brighter. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was like someone had just opened the Ark of the Covenant in my front yard. I paused the TV. The light was pouring in through the front bay window, cutting through the sheer curtains, and casting long, harsh shadows against the back wall. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain and immediately regretted it. I had to squint, shielding my eyes with my hand. Across the street, on the elevated fortress of Mrs. Higgins' lawn, 3 distinct suns had appeared. She had installed floodlights. But not just any floodlights. These weren't the solar-powered garden lights you stick in the dirt. These were industrial-grade, stadium-style halogen monstrosities mounted on 10-foot poles. And they weren't pointed at her driveway. They weren't pointed at her porch. All 3 of them were angled downward, directly across the street, focused with laser-like precision on my house. Specifically, my bedroom and living room windows. I stared, mouth agape. It looked like an alien abduction was in progress. The glare was so intense I could see dust motes dancing in the air inside my own living room. I grabbed my phone and opened the Lux Light Meter app, a tool I used for work sometimes. I held it up to the window glass. 2,500 lux. For reference, a typical living room is about 50 lux. An operating room is 1,000 lux. She was hitting me with double the brightness of open-heart surgery. I marched to the front door and threw it open. The heat from the bulbs actually felt palpable across the street, though that might have just been the heat of my own blood boiling. Mrs. Higgins was standing on her porch, arms crossed, wearing that same floral bathrobe. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had just nuked. "Mrs. Higgins!" I shouted, holding my hand up to block the glare. "What is this?" "Security!" she yelled back. She didn't sound screamy this time. She sounded smug. "I didn't feel safe. After your car was broken into, I realized the criminal element is rising. I need to protect my property." "You're not protecting your property," I yelled. "You're lighting up my property. You're pointing them directly at my windows." "I need to illuminate the perimeter," she called out. "The threat comes from the street. The threat comes from your direction." "This is insane. I can't sleep with this." "Get blackout curtains," she cackled. "That's what you told me. Close your blinds. It's a free country, Michael. They are on my land." I pulled my phone out and dialed the non-emergency line. I didn't even go back inside. I stood on my porch, bathed in the interrogation light, and waited for the police. It took 40 minutes. When the cruiser finally rolled up, I was relieved to see it wasn't Officer Davis. It was a younger guy, Officer Miller. He stepped out of the car and immediately squinted, putting his hand over his eyes. "Whoa," Miller said. "Bright out here." "Officer," I said, walking down my driveway. "She installed these tonight. Look at the angle. They are pointed directly at my face." Miller looked at the lights. Then he looked at Mrs. Higgins, who had scurried down her steps to meet him at the curb. "Officer," she chirped, "I am just so scared. A single woman living alone. I heard noises. I needed better lighting." "Ma'am," Miller said, "these are excessively bright. You're blinding your neighbor." "They are security lights," she said, her voice dropping to a fake, trembling whisper. "Are you saying I don't have the right to feel safe? Are you saying a woman can't protect herself?" Miller hesitated. I saw the hesitation. It was the hesitation of a man who didn't want a lawsuit. "Is there a law against lumens?" she asked innocently. Miller looked at me. "Sir, technically, if they are on her property and they aren't like strobe lights causing seizures, it's a civil matter. It's a dispute." "A civil matter?" I pointed at my house. "My house looks like a 7-Eleven. Look at it. I can read a newspaper in my bedroom with the lights off." "I understand," Miller said. "But unless she's breaking a noise ordinance or a zoning law, I can't force her to take them down. I can ask her to adjust them." "I can't adjust them," Higgins lied smoothly. "They are fixed mount, professional installation, for maximum coverage." "Maximum coverage of my master bedroom!" I shouted. "Sir, calm down," Miller warned. "Calm down. She's doing this out of spite because of my little LED light." "It's not spite," Higgins smiled, a smile that was all teeth and no joy. "It's safety. I just want to feel safe." Miller sighed. "Ma'am, maybe you could install shields, or lower the wattage." "I'll look into it," she said, "but I can't promise anything. Bulbs are expensive." Miller turned to me. "Sir, you're going to have to take this up with the city or the HOA if you have one." "We don't have an HOA," I said. It was usually the best thing about this neighborhood. Tonight, it was the worst. "Then civil court," Miller said. "Sorry, I can't destroy private property because it's bright." He got back in his car. He drove away. Mrs. Higgins stood there for a moment, bathed in the back glow of her 3 artificial suns. She looked at me. "Have a good night, Michael," she said. "Sleep tight." She turned and walked back into her house. I stood there, my shadow cast long and sharp behind me against my own garage door. I felt a twitch in my left eye. I looked at the 3 lights. They hummed, a low electric buzz of pure energy. I went inside. I taped cardboard over my bedroom windows. It looked trashy. It looked like a crack den, but even with the cardboard, the light bled through the cracks. It leaked around the edges. I lay in bed, staring at the glowing outline of the cardboard. The anger didn't come in a hot flash. It came in a cold, slow tide turn. I was an engineer. I solved problems. She wanted to play with light? Fine. I remembered something from Physics 101. The law of reflection. The angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. She was sending a lot of energy my way. Thousands of lumens. She was paying for the electricity. She was generating the photons. All I had to do was refuse to accept delivery. I didn't need to make my own light. I just needed to return hers. I finally drifted off to sleep with a single thought looping in my brain. Mirrors. The next morning, the cardboard on my windows was depressing. It blocked the sun, but it also blocked my view of the world. I peeled it off and sat in my kitchen, drinking black coffee and staring at Mrs. Higgins' house. Her floodlights were off now, looking like dormant cannons pointed at my castle. I opened my laptop and started researching local ordinances. City Code 14.2. Fences. Maximum height 6 feet. Must be wood, vinyl, or chain link. City Code 14.5. Outbuildings. Sheds must be set back 10 feet from the property line. City Code 15.8. Nuisance lighting. Lighting shall not be directed in a manner that creates a hazard for drivers. Nothing about blinding neighbors. I sat back. The law was useless. If I put up a 6-foot fence, her house was higher up the hill. The lights would shine right over it. I needed something taller, but taller was illegal. Unless... I pulled up the section on landscaping and decor. City Code 16.1. Yard art and sculptures. Decorative structures, statues, and artistic installations are permitted within property setbacks provided they do not impede line of sight for traffic. There was no height limit listed for art. There were no material restrictions for art. I smiled, a slow, wicked smile that scared my dog. "Buster," I said, "we're going to become art collectors." I grabbed my keys and drove to the industrial district. I didn't go to Home Depot. Home Depot was for amateurs who wanted to build birdhouses. I needed steel. I needed fabrication. I needed someone who didn't ask questions about why a man needed a 12-foot-tall concave reflector. I pulled into a gravel lot in front of a corrugated metal building. The sign out front said Rusty's Custom Metal and Welding. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "If you can draw it, we can weld it. If you can't draw it, get out." I walked into the shop. The air smelled like ozone and grinding dust. Sparks were flying in the back. A man walked out of the gloom. He was built like a vending machine, wearing welding leathers that looked like they had been chewed on by a bear. He had a beard that contained at least 3 different colors of metal shavings. He lifted his welding helmet. He looked at me. Clean-cut, polo shirt, soft hands. "We don't fix lawnmowers," he grunted. "I don't have a lawnmower," I said. "I have a neighbor." The man paused. He wiped his hands on a rag. A glimmer of interest appeared in his eyes. "What kind of neighbor?" "The kind that installs 3 stadium floodlights pointed at my bedroom because I have a motion sensor LED," I said. The man let out a low whistle. "That's a special kind of crazy." "I need to build something," I said. "I can't build a fence. It's illegal. I can't build a wall. But I can build a sculpture." "A sculpture," he repeated, skeptical. "Yes, a modern art piece, very avant-garde. It needs to be about 12 feet tall. It needs to be about 8 feet wide. And it needs to be made of polished, marine-grade stainless steel. Mirror finish." The man stared at me. He did the math in his head. He looked at the ceiling, then back at me. "And let me guess," he rumbled. "This sculpture needs to be slightly curved? Maybe parabolic?" "To represent the curvature of the universe," I said, "and the duality of man." "Right," he smirked. "And the focal point of this universe?" "About 60 yards away," I said, "at an elevation of 10 feet. The welder threw his rag onto a workbench. He extended a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. "I'm Rusty," he said. "Come into the office. I've got the good coffee." We sat down at a desk covered in blueprints and grease. I sketched out the design. It was simple, really. A steel frame, anchored deep in concrete, to prevent wind damage, and also to prevent Higgins from pushing it over. Attached to the frame would be 4 sheets of 316 grade stainless steel, polished to a No. 8 mirror finish. "That's pricey," Rusty warned, tapping the paper with a thick finger. "Our 8 finish is like glass. You touch it, you leave a print, but it reflects 99% of the light." "Price is not the primary concern," I said. "Sleep is the concern. And justice." "I like justice," Rusty said. "My ex-wife was a Karen, called the cops on me for welding in my own garage on a Sunday. I feel your pain." "Can we curve it?" I asked. "I don't want to just bounce the light back. I want to return it to sender, with interest." Rusty grabbed a calculator. "If we put a slight concave bend in the vertical supports, create a focal point, yeah, we can turn those 3 floodlights into one very, very angry spotlight. It won't burn her house down. We don't want arson charges, but it'll light up her living room like the 4th of July. "Perfect," I said. "When can you start?" "I'm booked for 3 weeks," Rusty said. He looked at my sketch again. He looked at the gleam in my eye. "But I can bump you to Thursday. This sounds like fun." "One thing," I said. "I need an invoice. And on the invoice, do not write giant mirror or reflector. It needs to say custom art installation, the Shield of Solitude." Rusty laughed. It was a loud, barking sound that rattled the filing cabinets. "Shield of Solitude. I love it. I'll have the boys prep the steel tomorrow." I left the shop feeling lighter than I had in days. I had a plan. I had a partner. And soon I would have a giant, legal, unstoppable mirror. Mrs. Higgins thought she controlled the light. She was about to learn that light is a two-way street. The following Tuesday, I stood in line at the Department of City Planning and Zoning. The room smelled of floor wax and crushed dreams. I was holding a folder containing Rusty's CAD drawings, a checkbook, and a printed definition of abstract expressionism from Wikipedia, just in case things got intellectual. I finally reached the counter. The clerk, a man named Gary, who looked like he had been personally victimized by a photocopier, didn't look up. "Next," Gary sighed. "Hi, Gary," I said, putting on my most harmless taxpayer face. "I'm here to apply for a permit for a backyard structure." Gary adjusted his glasses. "Fence, shed, or pergola?" "None of the above," I said. "Art." Gary paused. He looked up. "Art?" "Yes, a sculpture, a standalone metal installation." Gary narrowed his eyes. "Is it a sign? Are you advertising something?" "No. It's an expression of my inner turmoil regarding the suburban condition." "Right," Gary said, unimpressed. "Is it over 6 feet tall?" "It is 12 feet tall." "Then it's a structure. You need a variance for anything over 6 feet if it's within the setbacks." "Actually," I tapped the counter, I checked Code 16.1. Decorative structures and statuary are exempt from height restrictions provided they are not habitable and do not obscure traffic visibility. It's not habitable, unless you're a pigeon, and it's in my backyard, nowhere near the road. Gary stared at me. He hated that I knew the code. He opened the folder and looked at the drawings. He saw the curved steel panels. He saw the massive concrete footings. "This looks like a billboard," he said. "It's a monolith," I corrected. "Like in 2001. A space odyssey, but shiny. It represents the reflection of the self." "It represents a giant metal wall," Gary countered. "Art is subjective, Gary." He sighed again. He stamped a form. Then he stamped another form. $50 fee. If it falls on a neighbor, it's your liability. If it reflects sunlight into a pilot's eyes and crashes a plane, it's your liability. "I'll take my chances with the FAA," I said. I walked out with the permit. Step 1 was complete. I was now the legal owner of a permit to build a weapon of mass reflection. Construction began on Thursday at 7:00 a.m. sharp. Rusty didn't bring a pickup truck. He brought a flatbed semi-trailer carrying steel beams that looked like they belonged in a skyscraper. He also brought a crew of 3 guys who looked like they were auditioning for a Viking raid. There was Tiny, who was 7 feet tall. Sledge, who carried a sledgehammer he clearly didn't need for this specific job, but liked the aesthetic of. And Dave, who looked like an accountant, but was apparently the best welder in the tri-state area. The noise began immediately. An auger started drilling holes into my lawn for the concrete footings. It sounded like a dinosaur choking on a chainsaw. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the destruction of my grass with a sense of grim satisfaction. It took exactly 4 minutes for the front door of the Higgins residence to fly open. Mrs. Higgins didn't walk. She marched. She was wearing a different bathrobe today, purple silk with dragons on it. She looked like a Yakuza boss who had just woken up from a nap. She stopped at the edge of my property line, sensing the invisible barrier where yelling turned into trespassing. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed over the roar of the auger. I signaled for Rusty to kill the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," I shouted cheerfully. "Just doing some landscaping." "Landscaping?" She pointed a trembling finger at the massive steel I-beams lying on the grass. "That is not landscaping. That is industrial waste. You are building a factory. This is a residential zone." "It's not a factory," I said, walking down the driveway to meet her. "It's art." "Art?" she scoffed. "You don't know art from a hole in the ground." "Well, actually, right now it is a hole in the ground," I said, gesturing to the fresh dirt pile. "But soon, it will be the Shield of Solitude. It's a sculpture." "It's hideous," she yelled, even though we hadn't built it yet. "I will call the HOA." "We don't have an HOA, Mrs. Higgins. You tried to start one in 1998 and nobody signed up." "I will call the city." "Way ahead of you." I pulled the permit out of my back pocket and held it up. "Permit number 442B, approved for artistic installation. It's all legal." She stared at the permit. Her eyes darted from the paper to the steel beams. She seemed to be calculating her next move. Then her expression shifted. She looked smug? "Fine," she said, smoothing her robe. "Build your ugly statue. It won't stop me. You think a little metal stick will block my security lights? I have 3,000 lumens, Michael. 3,000. Nothing you build will block that safety." I fought the urge to smile. She thought I was trying to block the light. She thought I was building a wall. "I understand, Mrs. Higgins," I said, acting defeated. I need some privacy. The light is so bright. I thought maybe if I put something up, it would help dampen the psychological impact. It won't, she said, delighted by my misery. Light travels, Michael. It bounces. It finds a way. You can't hide from the truth. You're right, I said. Light does bounce. She missed the double meaning entirely. Enjoy your waste of money, she sneered, and turned back to her house. Okay, boys, I yelled to the crew. Fire it up! The auger roared back to life. By 2:00 p.m., the frame was up. It was ugly, just a skeleton of gray steel tubing rising 12 feet into the air. It looked like the goalposts for a game played by giants. By 4:00 p.m., the panels arrived. This was the moment of truth. Rusty had covered the polished side of the stainless steel sheets with a protective white plastic film to keep them from getting scratched during transport. This was crucial, because if Mrs. Higgins saw giant mirrors going up, she might figure it out. Careful with these, Rusty barked at Tiny. These sheets cost more than your truck. Don't dent 'em. They bolted the sheets to the frame. The structure was concave, a gentle, parabolic curve that swept inward. To the untrained eye, it just looked like a weird, white, curved billboard facing Mrs. Higgins' house. It looks like a drive-in movie screen for squirrels, Dave the accountant/welder noted. It's beautiful, I said. Rusty wiped sweat from his forehead. All right, Mike. The panels are set. The curve is adjustable. See these bolts on the back? He walked me behind the structure. There were heavy-duty tension bolts connecting the steel sheets to the frame. Tighten the top ones. The curve dips down, Rusty explained. Tighten the sides. It wraps in. It's basically a giant contact lens. You can focus this thing wherever you want. But we can't focus it yet, I whispered. Not while the sun is up. If we take that protective film off now, and the sun hits it, we might melt the tires off her Honda. Right, Rusty nodded. We wait for dark. We calibrate tonight. Leave the film on, I said. We tell her it's the finish. White minimalist chic. The crew packed up. Rusty handed me a socket wrench. You're the operator now, Captain, he said. Call me if you need to weld anything else, or if you get arrested. Thanks, Rusty. Hey, he paused, looking at the white monolith. When you peel that film off, send me a video. You got it. The sun went down. The waiting game began. I sat on my back patio, which was now protected by the shadow of the massive structure. It was strange. For the first time in days, I felt hidden. But the real show hadn't started yet. At 8:15 p.m., click buzz. The enemy engaged her weapons. Mrs. Higgins' 3 floodlights roared to life. Beams of intense white light shot across the street. Hungry for my living room, but tonight they didn't hit my window. They hit the back of the shield of solitude. Or rather, they hit the white plastic film covering the steel. The structure glowed dully. It blocked the light perfectly. My living room was dark. I could have stopped there. I could have left the film on, enjoyed the shade, and lived a peaceful life. A rational man would have done that. But Mrs. Higgins wasn't done. I heard her back door open. I crept to the side of the sculpture to peek around. She was in her yard with a flashlight, inspecting the new addition to the neighborhood. She yelled across the street. It looks like a giant piece of toilet paper. It's minimalism, I yelled back from the shadows. It blocks my view of the street, she complained. Now I can't see if you have drug dealers coming over. I don't have drug dealers, Mrs. Higgins. I have a Costco membership. Likely story. She went back inside. She left the lights on. Of course she did. She wanted to burn through the toilet paper. I waited until 2:00 a.m. The neighborhood was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the transformer on the pole and the distant bark of a dog. I crept out of my back door. I was dressed in all black, which felt appropriate for a ninja mission, though less appropriate for a guy named Mike who had a bad lower back. I carried a stepladder, the socket wrench Rusty gave me, and a high-powered green laser pointer. I went to the structure. The white plastic film was still on. I found the edge of the film on the bottom panel. I peeled it back just a few inches. Underneath, the steel was black. Not painted black. It was so perfectly polished that it looked like dark water. It reflected the moonlight with startling clarity. I took a deep breath. Here we go. I spent the next hour peeling the film off. It made a ripping sound, like heavy tape coming off a box. I tried to go slow to minimize the noise. Rip. Pause. Rip. When the last piece of plastic fell to the grass, I stepped back. It was terrifying. The structure was invisible. Because it was a perfect mirror, it reflected the night sky, the grass, and the dark houses. It looked like a hole in reality, but it wasn't catching the floodlights yet. The angle was slightly off. The light from Mrs. Higgins' house was hitting the mirror and bouncing harmlessly into the sky, lighting up the belly of a passing cloud. Time to calibrate, I whispered. I climbed the stepladder behind the structure. I put the laser pointer against the surface of the steel, aiming it right in the center. The green beam shot out, hit the steel, and bounced. I watched where the dot landed. It landed on her roof shingles. Too high. I used the wrench. I tightened the top tension bolts. Creak, creak. The steel groaned softly as it bent. I checked the laser again. The dot moved down. Now it was on her gutter. Creak, creak. Now it was on the siding above her window. I moved to the side bolts. I needed to narrow the beam. I didn't want to light up her whole house. I wanted concentration. I wanted to take the energy of 3 floodlights and compress it into the square footage of a single bay window. I tightened the left side, then the right. The steel face curved inward, forming a shallow bowl. I checked the laser. The dot was now tight, small, and sitting directly in the center of the glass pane of Mrs. Higgins' living room window. I climbed down. I wiped my fingerprints off the back of the bolts. I walked around to the front of the mirror to check the alignment from the source perspective. I stood exactly where the focal point would be. I looked at Mrs. Higgins' lights. They were still on, but because of the angle I was standing at, I wasn't in the hot zone yet. I moved my head slowly to the left. Suddenly, flash. It was blinding. I yelped and jumped back. It wasn't just light, it was heat. Even from 60 yards away, the convergence of those 3 beams into the parabolic mirror created a spot of intensity that felt like opening an oven door. I rubbed the spots from my eyes. It worked. It worked too well. I looked at her house. The lights were blazing away, feeding energy into my mirror. My mirror was catching it, focusing it, and sending it back. But right now, because of the way I had angled it, the return beam was hitting just below her window, on the brickwork. I needed one last adjustment. I went back behind the structure, 1/4 turn on the bottom bolts, tilted up, just a hair. I didn't need the laser this time. I could see the result immediately. A brilliant, rectangular patch of daylight appeared on the front of Mrs. Higgins' house. It slid up the brick wall like a rising sun. It hit the windowsill. Then, it hit the glass. The effect was instantaneous. Her living room, which had been dark behind the sheer curtains, suddenly lit up. And I don't mean it got bright. I mean it looked like a nuclear testing footage. The sheer curtains glowed incandescent white. I could see the silhouette of a vase inside the room cast a shadow on the back wall that was sharp enough to cut steak. I quickly packed up my ladder. I threw the plastic film into my garage. I ran inside, locked the door, and peered through my peephole. It was 3:15 a.m. The trap was set. Now we waited for the wake-up call. The wake-up call came faster than I expected. Mrs. Higgins must have been a light sleeper, or maybe the sheer thermal radiation waking up her cat alerted her. At 3:22 a.m., the front door of the Higgins residence flew open. Mrs. Higgins stumbled onto the porch. She wasn't wearing the dragon robe. She was wearing an old flannel nightgown, and she was shielding her eyes with both hands. "Fire!" she screamed. "Help! Fire!" I watched from my darkened living room. I felt a pang of guilt. Oh God, did I actually set her curtains on fire? I grabbed my fire extinguisher, always be prepared, and ran out the front door. "Mrs. Higgins, what is it?" I yelled, running to the curb. "My living room!" she shrieked, pointing back at her house. "It's full of fire! It's blinding! There's an explosion!" I looked at her window. There was no smoke. There were no flickering orange flames, just a steady, piercing, god-awful white light. "I don't see smoke, Mrs. Higgins." "It's white fire!" she yelled. "It's the rapture!" She turned to look at my house, and then she froze. She saw it. Standing in my yard, gleaming like a diamond in the rough, was the shield of solitude. It was catching the output of her 3 floodlights, which were still happily buzzing away, and sending a concentrated beam of pure vengeance straight back into her soul. She stopped screaming. She lowered her hands. She squinted at the mirror. Then she looked up at her own lights. Then back at the mirror. Then back at her window. The gears in her head ground together. "You," she hissed. "Me?" I asked innocently, holding the fire extinguisher like a baby. "You turned a light on me." "I don't have a light on Mrs. Higgins," I said, gesturing to my dark house. "My power is out. I'm saving the planet." "Liar! Look at that!" She pointed to the blinding spot on her window. "That's just a reflection," I said. "It's the duality of nature. What you put out into the world comes back to you." Namaste. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. She lunged toward me but stopped at the property line. "Turn off your mirror!" "I can't turn off a mirror, Mrs. Higgins. It doesn't have an off switch. It's a passive object. It is simply existing." "I'll smash it." "That would be destruction of property," I said calmly. "And it's stainless steel. You'd break your hand." She vibrated with rage. She looked at her floodlights, the source of her power, the source of her pain. "I'll call the police," she threatened. "Please do," I said. "I'd love to hear Officer Davis's opinion on physics." She pulled a cell phone out of her robe pocket. She dialed 911. "Yes, police! My neighbor is attacking me with a death ray. He has a solar weapon. I am burning alive." I stood there, leaning on my fire extinguisher, and waited for the grand finale. Officer Davis arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't turn on his siren. He didn't even turn on his flashing lights. He just rolled up to the curb, parked, and sat in the car for a solid minute. I assume he was praying for retirement. He got out. He adjusted his belt. He looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was cowering on her porch because her living room was currently uninhabitable. He looked at me, standing by my shiny new sculpture. He looked at the sculpture. He looked at the beam of light traveling from Higgins' house, hitting the sculpture, and traveling back to Higgins' house. He walked over to me. "Evening, Mike," Davis said. "Evening, Officer Davis." New art? He asked, tapping the steel frame. Modernism, I said. It symbolizes the circular nature of conflict. Uh-huh. Davis walked around the structure. He stood in the beam for a second, winced, and stepped out. Bright? Very. He walked over to Mrs. Higgins. Officer, arrest him! She screamed. Look at what he's doing! Mrs. Higgins, Davis said, his voice incredibly calm. Is that your light? He pointed to the floodlights on her poles. Yes, those are my security lights. And is that your window? He pointed to the glowing portal of doom that was her living room. Yes, he's shining a light into it. No, ma'am, Davis said. He has a mirror. You are shining a light into your own window. He's just holding the mirror. He aimed it, she argued. He curved it. It's a weapon. Davis looked back at me. I shrugged. Is it illegal to have a curved piece of metal in your yard? Davis asked, mostly to himself. I don't think so. Is it generating light? No. Is it making noise? No. He turned back to Mrs. Higgins. Ma'am, I can't arrest a man for having a shiny lawn ornament. If you want the light to stop, you have to turn off your floodlights. But then I won't be safe, she wailed. Safe from what? Davis asked. From the light you are creating? From him. He's standing there in his pajamas holding a fire extinguisher, Davis observed. He doesn't look like a threat. He looks like a man who wants to sleep. Mrs. Higgins stamped her foot. I will not turn them off. It is my right. Okay, Davis said. Then it is your right to have a very bright living room. Have a good night, ma'am. Mike, nice statue. Davis got back in his car. Mrs. Higgins stood there. I stood there. The mirror stood there. Well, I called out. I'm going to bed. Don't forget to wear sunscreen if you're going to watch TV in the living room. I walked inside. I went to my bedroom. It was pitch black. The mirror was doing its job, blocking the light from my windows and sending it all back to her. I lay down. It was quiet. It was dark. But the night wasn't over. The victory lap was just beginning. I woke up the next morning to a sensation I hadn't felt in weeks. Total, unadulterated refreshment. My bedroom had been dark, quiet. My dreams had been devoid of strobing lights or screaming neighbors. I stretched, cracked my back, and walked to the kitchen window. Mrs. Higgins's floodlights were off, which was expected during the day. However, the damage, or rather the impact, of the previous night was visible. Her front bay window, the one that had been the focal point of the Shield of Solitude, looked different. The sheer white curtains she loved so much were no longer hanging straight. They looked crinkled, like cellophane that had been held too close to a toaster. And on the brickwork just below the sill, there was a noticeable scorch mark, a clean, lighter patch of brick where the concentrated UV rays had power-washed the grime away. I poured my coffee and went out to the patio. The shield stood there, gleaming, innocently in the morning sun. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive engineering. But the war wasn't over. I knew Mrs. Higgins. She was fueled by a mixture of entitlement and spite that had a half-life of 1,000 years. She wouldn't give up after one bad night. I was right. Nightfall came. I sat on my back porch with a beer, waiting. The shield was prepped. The angles hadn't changed. At 8:00 p.m., click buzz. She turned them on. I admired her tenacity, in the same way you admire a cockroach that survives a nuclear blast. She was going to try to out-stubborn a law of physics. I watched the beam hit the mirror. I watched it focus. I watched the return fire slam into her living room. But this time, she didn't come out screaming. She had changed tactics. She had closed her heavy vinyl blinds, the expensive ones she usually kept open. She was trying to block the reflection. I sat there and sipped my IPA. "Good luck with that," I whispered. Physics is a cruel mistress. Light carries energy. When you focus 3,000 lumens of halogen light into a concentrated spot, you are essentially creating a solar oven. The mirror was grabbing all that infrared heat and dumping it right onto her window glass and those vinyl blinds. By 9 p.m., I saw movement. The blinds were twitching. By 9:30 p.m., I could see the blinds physically warping. They were sagging in the middle, melting like cheese on a burger. At 9:45 p.m., the front door opened. Mrs. Higgins didn't scream this time. She didn't march. She slumped. She walked out in her robe, sweating profusely. Her face was flushed red. Her house must have been a sauna. The radiant heat coming through that window would have overpowered any AC unit on the market. She walked to the pole mounted on her lawn. She looked at it with hatred. Not hatred for me, hatred for the light itself. It had betrayed her. She reached for the switch box mounted on the post. Her hand hovered. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. Turning that switch was admitting defeat. It was acknowledging that Mike, the guy with the Honda Civic and the Golden Retriever, had won. She flipped the switch. The neighborhood plunged into darkness. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a surrender treaty being signed. She stood there in the dark for a long time. Then she looked across the street. She couldn't see me in the shadows of my porch, but she knew. I was there. "I hope you're happy," she croaked into the night. "I am," I said softly, though she couldn't hear me. "I really am." She went inside. The final surrender happened 2 days later. I was working from home, designing a truss system for a warehouse, when a white van pulled up to Mrs. Higgins' curb. The side of the van read, "Sparky's Electric and Lighting." I watched from my office window. Mrs. Higgins came out, pointing at the 3 floodlight poles. She was gesturing wildly. The electrician, a guy with a ponytail and a tool belt, looked confused. He pointed at the lights, then pointed at the ground. She nodded aggressively. The electrician shrugged, grabbed a ladder, and went to work. One by one, the heads of the Hydra were removed. He disconnected the wiring. He unbolted the massive halogen fixtures. He capped the wires. When he was done, only the bare metal poles remained, skeletons of a failed siege. Mrs. Higgins wrote him a check on her porch. She looked diminished, defeated. As the van drove away, she looked across the street at my yard. She looked at the shield of solitude. I decided to be the bigger man. I walked out to my mailbox. "Afternoon, Mrs. Higgins," I called out. She stiffened. She turned slowly. "They were defective," she lied. Her voice was brittle. "The electrician said they were drawing too much power. Fire hazard. I had them removed for safety." "Safety first," I nodded solemnly. "You can never be too careful with heat sources." "Yes." "Well," she straightened her robe. "At least now I won't have to look at that hideous metal monstrosity in your yard. I assume you'll be taking it down?" I looked at the shield. It was gleaming. It was sturdy. It was bolted into concrete deep enough to survive an earthquake. "Actually," I said, leaning on my mailbox, "I've grown quite fond of it. The way it captures the morning sun, it really ties the yard together. Plus, the permit is valid for a permanent structure. Her eyes widened. You're keeping it? It's art, Mrs. Higgins. You don't just throw away art. Besides, I smiled, you never know when the criminal element might return. I need to be ready. She made a noise that sounded like a tea kettle depressurizing, turned on her heel, and marched inside. That Friday, I drove back to the industrial district. I walked into Rusty's Custom Metal and Welding. The shop was just as loud and smelly as before. Rusty was under a truck, welding an exhaust pipe. "Yo, Rusty!" I yelled. He slid out from under the truck on a creeper. He flipped his mask up. When he saw me, a grin split his beard. "The captain returns," he boomed. "Did it work?" I didn't say a word. I just set a case of imported German lager on his workbench. The really expensive stuff, $20 a six-pack. Beside it, I placed an envelope with a crisp $500 bill inside. "The enemy has capitulated," I said. "The lights are down. The blinds are melted. Victory is ours." Rusty laughed, wiping grease from his forehead. "Melted the blinds? Seriously?" "Curled up like bacon," I confirmed. "She told the electrician they were defective." Rusty cracked open one of the beers immediately. He took a long pull and sighed. "That," he said, pointing at the bottle, "is the taste of justice. You know, most people come in here wanting me to fix a trailer hitch or weld a gate. It's boring. But you? You gave me a purpose, Mike. We weaponized geometry." "We did good, Rusty." "The shield stays up?" "The shield stays up forever," I promised. "It's a monument to our alliance." "Good man." He raised his bottle. "To reflection." "To reflection," I toasted. 6 months have passed since the Great Photon War. Life has returned to normal. Mrs. Higgins still glares at me when I get the mail, and she still complains if my grass gets a 1/4 inch too long. But she never talks about lights. She bought some heavy blackout curtains and keeps to herself. The Shield of Solitude has become something of a local landmark. The neighborhood kids think it's a piece of a crashed spaceship. The mailman uses it to check his hair reflection before he delivers packages. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my back porch and look at it. It's just a curved piece of steel. It has no power source. It has no brain. It has no malice. It is simply a mirror. And that's the lesson, isn't it? Mrs. Higgins spent her energy trying to make my life miserable. She poured her time, her money, and her anger into projecting toxicity across the street. All I did was hold up a mirror. I didn't have to fight her. I didn't have to scream. I just had to ensure that she received exactly what she was giving. In the end, she couldn't live with her own light. She couldn't survive the environment she tried to create for me. The world is full of Mrs. Higginses. They want to shine their spotlight on you. They want to interrogate your life, expose your flaws, and blind you with their rules. They expect you to absorb it. They expect you to burn. But you don't have to burn. You just have to be polished. You just have to be sturdy. And most importantly, you have to be positioned at the right angle. Because if you do it right, they'll end up burning themselves down, and you'll just be sitting in the shade, drinking a cold beer, watching the show. And let me tell you, the view from the shade is spectacular.